U.S. President Joe Biden is calling the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal one of the toughest negotiations he's experienced after decades in politics. But after 15 months of war, Biden says Hamas had no choice. Its senior leadership was eliminated.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild.
The three-stage ceasefire begins on Sunday. The first phase lasts 6 weeks. It includes the gradual release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, and a surge in humanitarian aid to Palestinians. Phase 2 and 3 still need to be negotiated. Iddo Moed is Israel's ambassador to Canada. He's been joining us throughout the conflict. He's here with us today. Ambassador, thanks for coming in. It's good to see you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
15 months since we first met and started talking about this conflict, and we now have a new ceasefire deal in its initial stages. How are you feeling hearing this after all of this time?
It's a very mixed feeling. Today is the culmination of evil that was unleashed by Hamas on October the 7th that caused all these horrific scenes that we're witnessing both on the Israeli and the Palestinian side, all caused by the genocidal terrorist organization called Hamas and its leader, Yahya Sinwar, who were bent on destroying the state of Israel and killing and abducting and doing the worst possible damage to Israel because Israel is there. And this sense is still there, so I'm sad. What I'm feeling today is the sense that there will be closure for our families. I'm happy about that, but I'm sad because we don't see the end of this because we know Hamas is still there.
Okay, Hamas is still there, but and while this has been agreed to and announced to the world, it doesn't come into force until Sunday, and the Israeli cabinet, as we understand it at this moment, has still not given its final approval to this deal. And we've seen from the coalition partners, Finance Minister Smotrich saying this deal is a bad and dangerous deal for the national security of the state of Israel. How confident are you that the Israeli government, as it exists right now, will approve this deal with some of the big coalition partners and key ministers saying they don't want it?
I'm very confident. The vast majority of the Israeli people, the vast majority of the members of the Israeli Knesset and the majority within the Israeli cabinet all support this deal. But we must remember, let us be very, very clear. We set out 3 goals for this war. No Hamas in power, no military threat from Hamas, and release of the hostages. So today we're at a dilemma. What do we choose? Which one of the goals are we letting go? And at the moment, as it seems, we can understand, of course, that security-wise, Israel is not going to benefit from this deal. On the contrary, we already see now, as we speak, armed Hamas terrorists roaming the streets of Gaza. So we are very concerned about the future of this.
I just wonder, though, can the government survive this? Because I don't know your legislative schedule in the Knesset in Israel, but if these two parties, the Finance Minister Smotrich is a part of one, pull their support from Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition, this thing is fragile. It's done in phases that will take weeks, if not months. Is it possible you could end up in an election or having the Prime Minister being defeated in a confidence vote?
This deal will not cause the cabinet to fall. There is, I'm sure that, as I said, the vast majority of members of the Knesset will continue to support the government. There is one issue that is not technical at all in between the deal and it's being fulfilled, and that is that once terrorists are being released from prisons, the families of the victims have the right to appeal to the Supreme Court in Israel against their release. So although the names must have been agreed, there is also that stage that needs to be gone through. I assume, as in the past, that the Supreme Court will not stop the deal, but that's another issue. We have to remember we are releasing arch-terrorists. Yahya Sinwar himself was released through the deal that was done for Gilad Shalit. So potentially we are releasing the next Yahya Sinwar.
What worries you right now? Because it's taken a lot to get to this point. This framework of this deal, President Biden and others have said, is what was on the table in May and June of last year, and it didn't go ahead. We have seen ceasefires with hostage release in the past, and they failed after about 7 or 8 days. So what's your biggest concern right now in terms of this getting to Sunday and then going through the 3 phases to a full peace?
So there are a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, of course, everybody is very concerned. But let us look at the bigger picture. Iran is behind all of this. They have been supporting Hezbollah. They've been supporting and financing and directing Hamas. And they're behind the Houthis, who continue to fire rockets into Israel even now. So the bigger picture is very bleak. And this is really what keeps us all awake at night.
Right. But in terms of, you think your internal politics will hold, that this will happen on your end of it inside Israel, in terms of what is happening with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the coalition he has?
I'm confident in that because there is a very clear majority for the release of the hostages, and everybody supports that. Everybody knows it's a very bad deal. Nobody in Israel will tell you it's a good deal. There is no good deal when you release all these terrorists. But we understand that that is the best that we can get at the moment, and after contemplating and working and weighing all the pros and cons, this is the deal that we have to go through.
Well, what about the immediate plan for Gaza once this gets going? Clearly, you do not want Hamas back in charge of that territory and using that as a place from which to launch attacks like what we saw on October 7th. You had talked about Israel maintaining control of it through the IDF for security in the past. Where does that stand in this arrangement? Who will look after the people in Gaza and be responsible for the security and safety of the people in Gaza when this is implemented?
So in this deal, we have a number of international partners who will also be pitching in to make sure that whatever happened in the past will not come back again. And it's a very complicated situation because nobody stands ready to step in and take security to his own hands in the Gaza Strip, not even the Palestinian Authority, and nobody wants Hamas there. So that will be still an issue that needs to be dealt with in the coming days and weeks as this deal unfolds. And as we look at the new security situation on the Gaza Strip, from our end, the goal is very clear. No more threat, a military threat from Gaza into Israel.
You know, 33 hostages will be released in the first phase. It's been 15 months, right? You know how many people were taken. It's very unclear how many are still alive. You wear this tie that you have on, this orange tie, you've worn it every day, I believe, since because of the 2 little boys who were taken with the red hair. And obviously we don't know what their status is. I mean, what is your thoughts on what kind of grim news could be confirmed coming out of the potential good news of a ceasefire and a hostage deal today?
Kfir Bibas, who was born 2 years ago, will be celebrating his birthday in 2 days. And that's a very grim date because on that day he will not be with his family. We don't know if he's alive or not.
Right.
And we also know that even those who we know are dead, just like a Canadian-born Judy Weinstein, whose body's been held there for 15 months, we don't know when their families will have full closure. So all of that is very sad. There is nothing that is joyful that is coming out of Gaza. So every day is going to be a day of agony for many people.
Do you think Hamas has been fully eradicated, as was the stated goal? I know the leadership has been broadly taken out. Its fighting capacity severely diminished. But the criticism has always been that it's tough to kill an idea and a movement. And in fact, this conflict could have empowered it to some degree. What's your sense of where things are now with Hamas as an entity?
In my sense, some of the most fundamental tenets that hold Hamas in place are still there. So even beyond this rogue ideology of killing and eradicating the state of Israel, let's just take UNRWA, which is a United Nations-supported organization. That organization's education system created this hateful mob that attacked Israel. That organization gave shelter to bombs that were kept before Israel was attacked. That organization gave shelter to terrorists who attacked Israel. And that organization is still there. So there is a lot that the international community can do to create a new reality on the ground in Gaza.
Okay, Iddo Moed, lots more to talk about this as more details and more clarity become clear over the coming days. But I want to thank you for being here today. That's Iddo Moed, Israel's ambassador to Canada. What you're looking at there, you're seeing celebrations in Han Yunis as a Gaza ceasefire deal is reached. As we just heard from Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault, phase 1 of this plan will start on Sunday. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was one of many world leaders welcoming the news today, urging all parties to uphold their commitments.
I urge the parties and all relevant partners to seize this opportunity to establish a credible political path to a better future for Palestinians, Israelis, and the broader region.
Mona Abuamara is the chief representative of the Palestinian General Delegation here in Canada, and she joins me now in the studio. Mona Abuamara, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, David.
How you feeling? I saw you wiping your eyes there. We met 15 months ago. What are your thoughts today?
So since day one, we were calling for a ceasefire and end to the aggression by Israel on Gaza. And today, there's a sigh of relief. I can't tell you I'm celebrating because nothing is certain. So we're hoping that the ceasefire will end the agony of the first phase of the agony of the Palestinian people undergoing genocide. But it certainly is not the end.
It's still fragile, right? You heard some of what Adrian was saying there. There's still a lot of hurdles to be cleared. And we still don't, it's still unclear to me whether the Israeli cabinet has officially signed off on this, but we've seen their finance minister, Smotrich, say, he kind of threatened to resign. He said, this is bad and dangerous deal for the national security of the state of Israel. What worries you right now about the survival of this arrangement?
It's not a worry because it doesn't matter if Israel decides that it wants to continue this war, it will find an excuse to do so. So right now, it's just the assurances by the other countries need to stand, and the international community finally needs to step in and guarantee that it will stand up to Israel if it tries to go back to what it has been doing.
There was a ceasefire deal in November of 2023, and it lasted 8 days, and then it fell apart. What's your optimism level about this one enduring for the full 6 weeks at least?
So the first one, at that point, Netanyahu was not actually wanting to end his aggression. He wanted to prolong it as much as he could. So the pressure was amounted only to the 6 days of halting of Israeli hostilities. This time, I think, finally, the American administration, the outgoing and the incoming decided that it's the end, and that shows us exactly when the U.S. wants Israel to do something, it can push it to do it.
Do you think it's the arrival of Trump, or is it the fact that Joe Biden is not running it? I mean, what do you think changed this time? Because clearly America had an enormous role in this, as it has throughout the entire conflict. Was it the unpredictability of Donald Trump that got Benjamin Netanyahu on board here?
The role of the U.S. administration during these 15 months was to fuel it, to help Netanyahu prolong the genocide, to help Netanyahu with weapons and with cover, with vetoes in the United Nations Security Council to make sure that a ceasefire is not reached. Now we have Biden leaving. He wants to credit it to himself. As we've seen, this is all about credit. But also, the incoming administration, Trump doesn't want that black dot on his start of administration. He doesn't want genocide. He doesn't want the word war crimes or anything to deal with that. He wants to accredit it to the previous administration and make deals going forward. And that's why this happened now.
Right. So obviously there's going to be a significant aid response, an international response. The security situation still very tenuous and uncertain inside Gaza. Hamas, a lot of people will not want them to obviously be part of control of Gaza when this is over. The Palestinian Authority, which you're a part of, can you step in there? Can the Palestinian Authority step in and provide that sort of governance, or is it too early to know what happens with Gaza once the fighting stops?
It's not too early to know. It's just the engagement, the role of Israel and the U.S. In all of this, and the lack of effort by the international community that played not just in the past 15 months, but for the decades, the role of continuing this disengagement between West Bank and Gaza that was besieged, and Netanyahu fueled that disengagement as well. So today, the resolution stands in the will of actually reaching an end and treating the disease. So it's all connected, as you're reporter today rightfully stated that the Israeli citizens, the Israeli government does not want to acknowledge that October 7th did not happen in a vacuum, just like the UN Secretary General also have pointed out. So it's not about what was reached today on a ceasefire deal. It's what the world wants to do next. Recognize Palestine, and that's specifically a call for me to Canada, and then put a path of credible, irreversible way to statehood on the ground. And the occupation, dismantle the apartheid system, and to actually realize a free Palestine, sovereign and contiguous, without the control of Israel.
But where do you think, just as a final point, Mona Abuamara, where does that stand now? Because we don't know what's going to happen with Gaza. And there are elements of the Netanyahu government, as you well know, who believe Gaza belongs to Israel, as does the West Bank. And I know Canada has suggested it was moving towards a two-state solution. Joe Biden supported that. I'm not sure Donald Trump does, right? His former ambassador, or his new pick for ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has in the past supported the annexation of the West Bank and other things. Where do you think the two-state solution lives right now on this day? And maybe it's too early to know, because the ceasefire has only just been agreed to.
Unfortunately, nobody knows what Trump would think today and then tomorrow, so we can't rely on that part. We have to see what happens on the ground. But again, the realization of a two-state solution should not stand in the hands of Trump solely, because I think that Canada understands now more than ever what it means to be threatened. Annexation. And it's from your ally, not your enemy, like it's happening with us. Your UN ambassador to the UN, the Canadian ambassador to the UN, Mr. Barbre, tweeted the other day, and I retweeted that because it fell exactly with the words that you just change Canada to Palestine, and that fits the... He often tweets those things that fit exactly, but until now, ironically, Canada and the international community did not seem to put one and one together. He tweeted that imperialist ideology is very hard to shake off, but that's needed, and that using dominance and using power to achieve dominance is never good and will be faced with retaliation, and that you can't force people to not be treated as equal and have their own values and identities. So I think that that's the part for all countries, especially the Western world, to realize.
The toll of this has just been absolutely enormous, right? 467 days of fighting, 46,000 Palestinians killed, 100,000 more wounded. We've looked at a lot of images from Gaza, and you and I have talked about the images we show on TV versus what people see on social media, which are often far more grim. We saw images today for the first time from inside Gaza of happiness, joy, and celebration. What was it like to see that?
I think Gazans are the only people who get to dance and be happy, at least because the buzzing noise of all of these drones that followed them for 15 months. I lived horrors when I used in the West Bank to hear in Ramallah those drones, because knowing that at any point there might be bombing. So I think that they are the only people who get to actually feel relief, to sleep a whole night. And it's not happening yet,
not
because
yet.
Israel
not till
is
Sunday.
bombing Gaza furiously, and that's what Israel does at any point when it reaches a deal. But other than that, everybody else has lost in this test. For Palestinians, today maybe there's that relief and happiness, but in Gaza, we are going to start to unravel the horrors. We need to find our people under the rubble to bury them. We have to treat our wounded, and we have to start rebuilding, which is going to take decades, and people will live in agony until then. Still.
Mona Abuamara, I think the whole world hopes this ceasefire lasts and peace happens at last. I want to thank you for coming. It's Mona Abuamara, the Chief Representative of the Palestinian General Delegation to Canada. Thank you so much. After 15 months of war, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. Israel's cabinet has yet to officially approve the deal, but Benjamin Netanyahu's office says it hopes it will be finalized at some point tonight. U.S. President Joe Biden is calling it one of the toughest negotiations he's experienced after decades in politics.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild.
Here's what we know about the ceasefire plan so far. Phase 1 will span 6 weeks and include the release of 33 Israeli hostages, including all women and men over 50. There will also be a partial withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and a surge of aid into Gaza, which could see up to 600 trucks entering per day. Phase 2 and 3 will be negotiated during Phase 1, but it's anticipated they will include the release of all remaining hostages and a complete ceasefire. Jon Allen is a former Canadian ambassador to Israel. He's also a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He's guided us through a lot of this conflict, and he joins me now. Jon Allen, it's good to see you.
Thanks, David. Good to be here.
We've talked about a lot of almost ceasefire deals over the past 15 months. This one seems more real than all of those. What do you think of this as we learn some of these details today?
Well, I think we probably have a deal in part because all of the hard work that Blinken and Biden and their various negotiators and the Qataris and the Egyptians have done over the past at least 6 months. And we've probably got a deal because Steve Witkoff, the Donald Trump's Mideast envoy, stepped in last Saturday on Shabbat and ordered, I think, Bibi Netanyahu to stop saying no. And I think that probably means that the first phase, as long as extremists among Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad don't screw it up, I think we will see the release of those 33 hostages, and we'll see the beginning of quiet for the 2.3 million Palestinians who have been suffering bombing for 15 months. But it's going to be very important that the both sides meet their obligations, don't screw around, so that they can move on to the second phase. There will be many, many Palestinian prisoners released as well as part of the first phase.
Right.
And I think both sides have an interest in trying to ensure it continues.
The Trump influence on this, let's just start there, because this is the framework of a deal first proposed by Biden, announced under Joe Biden, but the enforcement of it and the length of it will live under President Trump. He is campaigning on ending all foreign wars, this and, of course, what's happening in Ukraine being the other. Do you really think that is what did it here? Do you think that was the change, that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't say no to Donald Trump after saying no to Joe Biden so many times?
I think that was definitely a factor. I think the fact that the pressure for a hostage deal in Israel has been increasing every day. There are demonstrations all over the country. I think the fact that Hamas has been severely weakened and was ready for a deal as well. I think that finally Bibi has stopped using total victory, and the threat that his two right-wing ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are going to resign if the deal goes through. He's realized he can't use that anymore. So it's a combination of factors, but I do think that that the Trump pressure was real in this case.
Okay, you mentioned Smotrich, and he had a comment today saying that this deal is bad and a bad and dangerous deal for the national security of the state of Israel. We oppose it with all force, speaking on behalf of his religious Zionism party. A clear condition for us to remain in the government is absolute certainty of returning to the war with great force on a full scale and in a new configuration until complete victory over all of the components are achieved. So, you know, he may no longer say no to Trump, or won't say no to Trump, but can Benjamin Netanyahu survive this? Because it is a coalition in the Knesset. Does he run the risk of losing his government over this, and then that may be threatening this deal?
Well, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir together have 14 seats. And if they were to withdraw, then Bibi would lose his majority of the coalition. But I think then what would happen is the opposition parties would step up because they are in support, very much in support of a deal and of the hostage release, of course. And so they would be able to provide cover for Bibi to do the deal and to stay in power. Once the deal progresses and over time, that may prove difficult for Bibi. But I'm also not sure that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir will actually, in the end, pull out. They've never had so much power. One of them, the Minister of Finance, the other, Minister of Security. And if they pull out, they lose all of that, and they lose some power going into the next election whenever it happens.
You know, things are changing rapidly too, right? With the change in administration in the United States, you know, they've both weighed in on this and want this to continue. We saw, you know, things have changed in Syria. You know, there's a détente with Hezbollah to some degree post what was happening there. It seems this is the last piece to sort of end what has been going on there. So, I mean, would they let it slip away, do you think, because of this fundamental belief that Hamas must be eradicated, even if it's impossible to eradicate an idea, and wanting full control of that land?
They would be crazy to let it go. And I don't think they will unless Hamas forces them to.
Right.
But I think we also have to keep in mind that Donald Trump wants a bigger deal. He wants the deal with Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the U.S., and that may or may not include the Palestinians. One hopes it does. But so there's a number of games being played here. Donald wants the Nobel Peace Prize, and he thinks that if he could do that expanded Abraham Accords, that he might be able to get it. So I think we've got to just wait and see how he begins to play this out. But it would be very important for Bibi to realize that Trump's a deal maker. He wants these deals, and Bibi probably shouldn't get in the way of it.
There was a very brief ceasefire deal in November of 2023. It lasted about 8 days, and some hostages, and there was some exchange, and there was a moment of optimism then, but it all fell apart. Very different circumstances 14 months later from there. But, you know, they've got to get through these 6 weeks to get to phases 2 and phases 3, and then there's the question of what happens with Gaza. What's the big obstacles you sort of see right now? If you think this will get through the cabinet and the government of Israel will hold, what's the big obstacle to get to those next phases?
Well, I think if the Israelis are committed, then the big potential obstacle are some extremists in Gaza, whether Palestinian Islamic Jihad or extremists that are out of the control of Hamas itself, who start firing rockets and threaten the deal. So that's problematic. And if Israel doesn't follow through on its own commitments to begin to withdraw from the Netzarim corridor to allow Palestinians to begin to return to the north, and they have to facilitate this, what is hoped to be a massive distribution of humanitarian assistance. it can happen by itself, and it's going to need both Hamas and the Israelis to get that humanitarian assistance in. So these things all have to fall into place. We have to hope they will. They're in the interests of both sides. Get more hostages out, keep the IDF soldiers from getting killed, and so important, free up the Palestinian people from the bombardments that they have been subject to for 15 months.
Yeah, and it seems that is continuing and will likely continue right up until Sunday. But there are a series of meetings to figure out how to do the hostage releases, how to set up a new security perimeter, and how to get that aid in, and then what order does it go in, whether it's shelter, food, water, or a mix of all of it, how you do that. Jon Allen, I suspect we'll be calling you again in the days ahead as we get more clarity and more developments on this. But thanks for being here today. We appreciate your time. That's former Canadian Ambassador to Israel, Jon Allen. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, David.